Good morning, and welcome to the shiur for Shabbos for Chalamoid Pesach. Go straight to the first question. On the first day of Pesach, I was asked to be shliach tzibur, and I looked over the Piyutim. When you do something once a year, you should be looking it over. And I looked at these words, the last of the Piyutim of Tal boitevorich mozoin, with the Jew Hashem should bless the food. Mashamanenu al yehirozoin, in our fat, here translate, there's no scarcity in our fullness, fine. Ioma asher hisa'at ketsaan. Ioma, the Ioma, well, all that. Asher hisa'at ketsaan, which you caused to travel like on otofik lorotzin, provide her in a generous way, etc.
No.
So, the word Ioma is not the word Uma, it's a different word. I've done that. You still can't hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear? Sound okay? Raise your hands, yes or no. Good. Okay, shkoyach. Okay, so here I'm looking at the word Ioma, Ayitzik, and it translates to the English, he translates the word Ioma as a nation. I was bothered by this because there's the word Umo and the word Ioma, it's a different word. But I traced this back. There's one of the traditional Meforshe Hamachs called Dayan Levi. And the Dayan Levi also, he translates Ioma as an Uma, a nation which you cause to travel like sheep. However, I found looking around, I found an article written about this Piyut, which relates the word Ioma to the Pasuk in Shiur HaShirim. So we have here, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, we've got two psukim in Shiur HaShirim which have the word Ioma. Yofa Atkzi, the other one, the first one, it's in Shiur HaShirim, both in Shiur HaShirim Vov. Yofa Ati Rayosi Kesirtso, you're beautiful, whatever Sirtso means. Novak Yerushalayim, beautiful Yerushalayim. Ayumo Kanid Golis. Ayumo means the one who is feared, Meloshin causing Amo. And the same thing in the second quote in Pasuk Yud. Mises Hanishkov Meshacha Yofa Kalvona, beautiful like this moon, Barak Achamkli like the sun. Ayumo Kanid Golis. So if you want to look it up, what Nidgolis means, Meloshin Doggle, prominent. But the word Ayuma means Meloshin Matil Amo. And therefore, I think the translation of Ayuma as a nation is incorrect. Ayuma means the one who is feared, is awed. And Asher Hisata Katsoin is inspired by the Pasuk in Tehillim, I think it's Ein Ches, Vayasa Katsoin Amoy. So it's Loshen of we see how the Yidden are referred to as a flock of sheep, and Hashem caused them to travel. So that's where the background of that phrase is. So I believe it's an incorrect translation. Okay. Not blaming translator in the Chabad Siddur because it's going back already to the Dayan Levi, who Bichlal is a very respected Mefarish. Okay, two other points here, and that is that I see in the Seder of this Piyut. So, by Lechodoidi, how does it work? The Chazan says Lechodoidi, then the Tzibur say Lechodoidi, and they say, then they say the next one, because Shabbos, what's it? Shomer v'zocher, yeah? And then the Chazan says Shomer v'zocher. So they say there is, the Chazan says the first stanza, then the Tzibur says stanza 1 and 2, and then the Chazan says stanza 2. And throughout, from that point onwards, the Chazan is it's first the Kohol and then the Chazan. So in the Chabad Siddur, which has got the instructions. It's called the annotated edition. There it has the Seder of that which I just described. The Chazan says the first stanza, then the Tzibur says stanza 1, stanza 2, and then it continues that the Tzibur are one ahead. In the Chabad Machzer, Chabad Siddur, sorry, so it says Kohol v'Chazan throughout. So nothing, no big issue here, but there is an inconsistency between the two Machzer, two Sidurim, which are both Tilas Hashem, both Chafadas Chabad. Okay, these things happen. One other thing, since I'm on this topic, so someone called me today and said that in his shul, apparently, what happened was that the Chazan for Musaf on the first day of Pesach somehow forgot, perhaps he slipped up and forgot to say the first piece of the Piyut. Now, just to explain, the first part of the Piyut is in the bracha of Mogen Avraham, and the rest of the Piyut is in the bracha of Mechaya HaMesim. So he finished off Mogen Avraham without realizing that he meant to add a Piyut in the middle. Then someone had alerted him to his omission. So he went back to the Piyut of Abiyah Minhag, whatever it is, whatever the beginning of that, whatever it is. He went back and finished it off, and then said Baruch Atah Hashem Mogen Avraham again, which I feel was definitely incorrect, because the bracha, once you finish the bracha, there's no point, no justification for saying it again. What do you do with a piece of Piyut which you missed out? I would say just you go further, farfal. If you want to park it into the next piece, okay. Just to explain, but this Piyut is connected after to Mogen Avraham, sorry, because the last 10 sentences there is lohogin leseilodos. It's got to do with protection, and therefore it's somoch lechasimo lohogin. Therefore it goes into Mogen Avraham. So really, it belongs in Mogen Avraham. It doesn't belong later, but that's. I'll leave it open. Okay. Let's go on to the next question. Someone asked me this week, a child is born, actually it's a girl, and they want to give the child a Jewish name. It happens to be that the mother is Jewish, the father is not. So in some cases, we would go and say, all right, let's use the grandfather's name. The mother's father's name, we'll give the name, the Jewish name of her grandfather. But as it would be, Azoidas, this Maisa was that this is a Jewish mother and a Jewish grandmother, but both the father and the grandfather are not Jewish. So what do you do now? Do you now say by Mishaberach, do you use the mother's name? Or do you say Bas Avrom Avinu, etc.? Bas Avrom. So this was the question. Now, I spent a long time looking around for this, and there's going to be different contexts. Where is the name important? You have in the case of a get, how to write the name there. You have to write the name, and that usually you have to write the father's name. You don't write the mother's name in a get. And then we have in the case of a mishaberach for naming and Aliya l'Torah. So well, of course, for a girl, it's not in Aliya l'Torah. But here's the question: in various contexts, what are we going to use? So obviously, in Gittin, it's a much more serious issue. If you put the wrong facts in a get, it could actually make the get possible. And you're talking about allowing a married woman to be divorced and to be remarried. It's a very serious business. So we won't address that over here. What we're looking now is from Hilchas Kriyas HaTorah. It talks here that this is in Kuflam Tes, that even the Gabe, the Rosh HaKnesses, the leader of the congregation, he should not have an Aliya l'Torah unless he is told Kara. And then it says that there was a minhag by the Sfardim that they would take the Aliya without being called up, to which there are more comments on B'Medinos Elu Ein Nohagin Kain. It's not customary for the chazan to just elect himself to have an Aliya. Even where the Bal Koire will not have an Aliya without the Sgan, the Gabe, telling him, go be, Yamid, etc. A person whose father, he defected from Yiddishkeit, he became a Christian, whatever. So Koirin Oyse B'Shem Avi Oviv. So then he would be called, would skip a generation, and would call him named after his grandfather. Avaloi B'Shmoy Levad. Just calling Amoid Reb Yitzchok without anything else, that was Shaloi Levi Sheberabim. That would be embarrassing. Also says further, the part which I skipped out, if he was already Barmitzva, and at a later stage in his life, the father became a Yishmatzach, so then he will just keep the name as he's been called up till now. He won't have to change. Again, Shaloi Levayish, all of a sudden has to change his name, so we'll just leave it the way it is. What's negative to us is, what's important for us in our discussion is where there is no Jewish father. So we have in the Mishnah, in Mishnah in Perek Dal of Kiddushin, we've got the 10 categories of status of Klal Yisrael, Kohenim, Levim, Israelim, etc. We've got Asufe or Shesuke. Asufe is where a child has been found abandoned. And Shesuke is where we know who the mother is, but the child is saying, is that my tati? Is that my tati? And when the mother says, shh, that's why it's called Shetuki, tell him to be quiet. So both are children who we don't know who the father is. Says the Ramah, Koirin Oisoi B'Shem Avi Imoy. We would use the maternal grandfather. Well, that's good if you know. Vim Einu Yodua, Koirin Oisoi B'Shem Avraham Kamoy Leger. So in the case where there's no Jewish grandfather's name available, so then we'd use the name Avraham. Now this is interesting because this person is not a ger. This person is Jewish, born Jewish, and whereas you use the word, we have the phrase Avraham is Avihem Shel Gerim. Avraham is the father for Gerim. Yeah, ask him. But here we're not talking about a ger. Here we're talking about a child who's got who's born Jewish, and yet the Ramah says to use the name Avraham. Again, in a get that may not be the halocha, but in this case, for giving a name an Aliya Torah, so we have here the Pesach of the Ramah to use the name Ben Avraham or Bas Avraham. So we'll go along with that. The reason why we use a father's name rather than a mother's name is because we have the Peloshon Lemish Bechoisum Leveis Avoisum. So we have here the Klal the Seder of using the father's name, and so therefore in this case we'd use Ben or Bas Avraham. Okay, let's move on to another shiur which came up this week. This one, child number 3. Someone poured from a boiling hot kettle into a Chometz sink. And now it's the Pesach'dike kettle. The child is, can they use the kettle? So let's read the halacha carefully. This is from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tov Nun Aleph. Now, the dinim of kashering, you have kashering from treif and you have kashering from chometz. So in Orach Chaim, you've got arichas gdola siman Tov Nun Aleph is about kashering of kettle, also Tov Nun Beis, and then you have in Hilchas in the beginning of Yerdei Chelik Beis, somewhere around Kuf Chof, somewhere around there, we have also about kashering kelim and treif, but the big arichas is here in Tov Nun Aleph. So the Alter Rebbe writes the following: Noyagim hanoshim sheloi liyishtamesh bepesach b'kdeido she'elu mimenu roischin tachas ha'el. So to explain, when you kashering kelim, normally you kasher by what's called hagola, and you have a big pot with water which is bubbling hot, and you take whatever dishes, cutlery, whatever, and you carefully put them into this boiling water just for a couple of seconds or less. Put it in the boiling water, take it out, and then you douse it with cold water. That's the way we do hag'olah. What happens if you have a large flat surface or something which cannot fit into a pot of water. How do you kasher that? So you want to pour boiling water, but once the water has left the kettle, it's kind of lost the intensity that it had before. And therefore, how are we going to simulate the boiling water effect with let's say a kitchen surface? Let's say a kitchen counter. How did the kitchen counter become a chometz? It could be that you took out a cake and put it straight onto the counter. You took out a challah from the oven, it's boiling hot. Well, you take out challahs from the oven, they are too hot to handle, yeah? And you put it straight down onto the counter. Well, then that may have made the counter have a Aliya of Chometz. So let's say you put down a kugel, which has got more moisture. It may be that if it's a Chometz-dike kugel and you put it straight onto the counter, so then that made the counter Chometz-dike. So how are you going to kasher it? You're going to pour water, but pouring water may not have the same power as dipping the chometz keli into a pot of boiling water. So here there's the eitzah, what's called even meluben, which means a red hot stone, a very hot stone. So what you'll do is you'll take a brick or something, and you'll put it on the burner, on the stove, and as you are pouring from the kettle, you're pouring boiling water from the kettle, you are also passing this very, very hot stone. It causes the water to continue to sizzle, to boil as it's touching the surface. So that's called even meluben. So it's for kashering, where you need to have kashering with boiling water on a surface which cannot be immersed in boiling water. So you use boiling water plus even meluben. So now the Alter Rebbe is saying that the minhag anoshim is that the keli, the kettle, or the pot, which they used to pour the boiling water together with the hot stone, so they don't use that keli for Pesach. Why? What's so chometz-dike about it? No chometz, it's just the steam from the countertop. There are those who explain this. You've got a lamp, and in the lamp it's got oil, but the oil is from it's a wax from a treifa from an animal, from a treifa animal. So you've got here you've got a bowl with oil, and you poured more fat from a kosher jug. You poured fat into this lamp, which has got treifa fat, and it says you should avoid this. Because there's an understanding that the vapor from the heat, or from the hot or the lower liquid, which is treif, will kind of go up the column of liquid as it's being poured. Physically, I have difficulty to understand this. I do know with electricity. With electricity, there'll be a conductivity. If you're pouring from one thing to the other, so then the electricity will go up also. But think about it in these similar terms, that there's a concern that the taste of the lower will kind of go up the steam, the stream, and go up to the upper keli. Who adin kan hevel hachometz haniflet mehakli atachten hanigol. The vapor from the chometz. Let's say you've been kashering a tin or a work surface which has got chometz absorbed, and now you're pouring boiling water with the even meluben. So now, so the vapor of the chometz will go up the column of the stream to the upper pot. This would only be an issue if the pouring of hot water on the even meluben, on the surface, was done in a direct stream and not in spurts. Okay, that's a side issue. All right, so we have here a bit of a concern. that when you pour from a kettle onto a Chometz surface, so then there is a concern that the vapor and the taste of Chometz will go upstream and make the upper keli Chometz. The imova v'ishtamesh bepesach b'oisek kedeira harei hatav shel muta afilu b'achila. The Alter finishes up. Although there is minhag hanoshim not to use that pot, the kashering pot, which they used for pouring onto the Chometz surface with the Even Melubin, they won't use it, they'll consider it the chimney-stacks. The Alter says, even if you did use that pot in violation of that minhag, then you're allowed to eat the food. Ad kan is the precedent which we have here in Shulchan Aruch. Let's come back to our case. Now, here the question is a different one. The question is not whether the food is kosher. The question is whether I may continue using that kettle. And here we have minhag hanoshim not to use the kettle, which was used for pouring onto a Chometz surface. So what's the story here? So would the same chumrah have to be applied to the kettle pouring onto the sink? So one of the stark differences is that there it's a stream of hot water pouring onto a cold surface, albeit, but there's the Even Melubin, which is heating up the water on the surface. The Chometz surface is effectively a hot surface, and therefore the steam there's a heat from the lower one there also. In our case, there's a Chometz sink which hasn't been used for a few days for Chometz. It's cold, and you're pouring from the kettle into that cold sink. It's not the same. It's not the same as that. Even here, you see the Alter Rebbe says noeges hanoshim. It's a chumrah. It's not a very strongly halachic based chumrah. So all right. So I think, in addition, I don't know how Chometz. Bechal, the sinks are always used with soap. Some people wash under the tap. So if they do fill it up, they use soap. So it's also tam pogum. I know that on Pesach we machmer even with tam pogum, but I think together with the fact it's tam pogum, it's also cold. There's no heat of the tachton. I think one can be makel to continue using the kettle over Pesach. Of course, it's not a chachila thing to do, but I think they could continue. Thank you. Someone is pointing out there's an alternative to using a hot brick is to use a kettle, and make sure you unplug the kettle when you do that. Right, let's go on to our next point. Okay, so this, as you see on the picture, is a rickshaw. And the question I had was, someone's on a holidays for Pesach in an island, and from their residence until where there's some kind of shul or a minyan, from one to the other, it's a 2-hour walk. It looks like, my impression is that the island is a bit like a horseshoe, because they could take a ferry from their place and reach to the shul in 10 minutes. So they have 3 options. One is, fourth option is just to stay home. But one option is to walk 2 hours. The other option is to get a rickshaw, and someone will wheel them that way. And then the other option is to take a ferry. So bichlal, to use a ferry, there is a concept, if you're koina shvisa, if there's a boat which is departing on Shabbos and you wanted to join that boat, so if you were in that boat at the onset of Shabbos, then you could go home and have your, whenever you're to your lodgings, and have your sort of Shabbos and spend the night at home, and then you could go back and reclaim your seat on the ship, and the ship departs of Shabbos. That's a possibility. I don't know whether that was a practical option here for this family to find a ferry and to be kohen shvisa ben hashvosha. So that is a possibility. Failing that, so then looking at the rickshaw. So we're talking here about we're talking about a small island, obviously. There's no shishim ribui. Now, so what's the shaila here? All right, so let's scroll down. Let's scroll down, and this is not such a well-known halacha. There used to be a concept called sedan chairs, which a sedan chair would mean that it's a chair, which like a bit of a cabin, and you had two porters. They had long poles, one on either side, and you had porters who would hold the chair on their shoulders, one porter in the front, one in the back, and they would carry this person from place to place. So the Shulchan Aruch is written in the Gemara, Mishnah, I believe. Also, one may not use this sedan chair on Yomtov. The Hainushu Yoshev Bekatedro is sitting on a cathedral, which means a fancy seat. The English word cathedral probably comes from the same word of a seat. And you have porters carrying this seat. That you're not allowed to use a sedan chair on Yomtov. It's a form of disgrace. It's a mundane form of behavior, and it's not appropriate for Yomtov. But if he is a person who is needed for the benefit of the public, to hear from him his wisdom, his shiur, or if he's going to look to tend to public needs, he may be carried in a sedan chair. That's okay. Or whatever. Okay. So here we have. That's why I was hesitating. Is there an issue about using this rickshaw because of this inyan of not using a sedan chair, which is a clear halacha? So the Eibishter geholfen that there is a sefer called Shalos Tshuvas Rav Pa'olim from the Ben Ish Chai, and he's talking about mamish, about rickshaws, and he deals with this issue for Shabbos and for Yomtov. And very interesting how he defines, there's no din of using a rickshaw or a sedan chair in Rosh Hashanah. It's only in Rosh Hashanah, which is an interesting thing. Somehow this zilzul about not using a sedan chair is limited to Rosh Hashanah. Okay. And then he says a very interesting cheshbon. Look at this rickshaw. I mean, this picture he didn't. This is not from the Ben Ish Chai. Look at this picture. The rickshaw, the seat is 4 by 4 tefachim. The seat is at least 4 by 4 tefachim. It's got 3 mechitzas, which are more than 10 tefachim high. I don't know whether you remember. I once talked about these large wheelie bins, which we have in this part of the world, that they are in themselves a din of Rosh Hashanah. So there's a whole din in Gemara about kaveres. If a person took out a hive, which is 10 tefachim high and 4 by 4 tefachim interior or measurement, so then he's potter, because the hive itself is a Rosh Hashanah. So wherever you take that hive, it's a Rosh Hashanah. So when come the moshel of the wheelie bin, you take that wheelie bin and put it on the street, actually what you've taken is a Rosh Hashanah. Wherever it is, it's a Rosh Hashanah. So you can't be faulted for carrying from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, because wherever that wheelie bin is, it is still Rosh Hashanah. And so Ben Ish Chai says something similar with a rickshaw. If the carriage has a structure of Rosh Hashanah, so then it's not a Rosh Hashanah, it's Rosh Hashanah. And the whole inyan of the issur of sedan chair is only if it's in carrying through the Rosh Hashanah. This, wherever it is, Rosh Hashanah. So this is part of his tzaddik siddur heter, where he does. Then he says the following. Then he says another cheshbon about using a boat. So there are poskim. This is in Siman Shin Lamed Tes. There are poskim who say that you can use a boat l'tzoirich mitzvah. So if you needed to get across the water to hear shofar, to bench lulav, so there are poskim and shiur simashin lamates who do allow letzorech mitzvah. But there, Mr. Bur and Shin lamates says clearly, but if it is for tefillah b'tzibur is not considered a great enough mitzvah to justify using a ferry on Shabbos v'Yomtov. Here, in the case of the rickshaw, which is the concern of being the din like this of a sedan chair, here the Ben Ish Chai says, here, just like you have a heter for a person to go le tzorech rabim, so he says, I feel I can also use the same heter for tefillah b'tzibur. So basically, it does remain that the Ben Ish Chai in Rav Pa'olim, he does give a heter to use a rickshaw if a person finds it difficult to get to shul, and this is the way they could get to shul. He basically does give a heter for it, and with the various conditions, but the conditions I just described, 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim square, that would be a tzad heter. Right. Someone asked me this week, we may have gone through this before, does the chipped rim of this mug disqualify it for Netilas Yodayim? So I'm going to take a mug. I may have done this before, but again, people forget things. Okay, so here you can see this mug, and let's say there would be a chip, or if there be a crack, and it's leaking. If it's leaking halfway down, then the halacha would look at the mug and say like this: below the leak, below the hole is keli. Above the leak is not keli. So what's the problem? When you pour on my hand, so I pour, if you can see the position of my hand in relation to the keli, so the water would come out. But if this front part, the upper part of the keli wasn't there, so the water pouring would not reach my hand. So since the upper part of the keli is not keli, so by pouring from this position, so then I'm not pouring from a keli, so I'm pouring from a non-keli, and therefore my Netilas Yodayim is not valid. But if I had poured, if the chip was a very small chip, just near the top, the essential point here is, would the water have come onto the hand even if the chipped area or the niche or whatever it is, where the damaged area, would the water have come to the hand in any case? And the answer is yes. And this picture which you see here, Bichlal, there's no question, because the chips, I'm not talking here for Kesher Bracha, we're talking about for Netilas Yodayim, a different halacha, yeah? For Kesher Bracha, if it's like this, it wouldn't be so appropriate. A chipped cost for Kesher Bracha isn't appropriate. But here we're talking for Netilas Yodayim. So that little chip doesn't make any issue. But even if it would be a bit further down, so long as the water would reach my hand from the water-containing part of the keli, that would be a kosher netila. So we have it, perhaps go quickly through this from the Alter Rebbe, and you can see the part which I underline, which I put in red letters, that the point that which was above the hole where it's leaking, that's not keli. And as a result, when you're pouring, so the water was coming to your hand, second letter, red letters. It's not from a keli, therefore it's possible. And then next, the red letters, if you lift it all the way and like really upside down, and then the water is coming to your hand in any case, that would be kosher. Okay. The last thing which you have there is a neutral derech hanekev. If you pour the water through the hole, and we've gone through this, I think, that mostly if you have a jug which has got a lip which is a bit lower than the rest of the jug, so the upper part, which is above the spout, is possible for netila, but by the spout, which is lower than the rest of the jug, you would be able to do the Netilas Yodayim from there. Let's move on. So here we have, someone asked me, one of our regular listeners has an einikel who's turning a Barmitzva on Shvi'i Shel Pesach. And there's a Chabad minhag that the first Aliya should not be on a Shabbos morning. So the shaila is, what about a Yomtov morning? So this letter is written to, you can see the date, it's from Tafshin Yud Ches. It's written to Rabbi Yisrael Kluvgant, whom I remember. He passed away while I was in Australia 40 years ago in Shlichus, and he writes about his son, whose his son is Menachem Mendel. Later he added the name Sholem because he married the daughter of Mendel Glick, and so you can't have a son-in-law and father-in-law the same name. So now everyone knows him as Sholem Mendel. So the Rebbe Issa was a cousin of the Rebbe from the Lavut side, and he asked the Rebbe, what about his son's Barmitzva, which is on Erev Rosh Hashanah. So that is Barmitzva Erev Rosh Hashanah. And so the second column, Inyan Aliya LeTorah. So Yodua Sicha de Chof Hei Shvat Tofrei Tzadik Vov. It's known the Sicha from the 25th of Shvat. That's the Barmitzva of the Frierdiker Rebbe's grandson. So there's a lot of stories there about the Barmitzva. It is by that Farbrengen, the Frierdiker Rebbe describes the Barmitzva of the Mittel Rebbe. Apparently, he did not. Many of the Sichas, including in this case, the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't even say them. He had the difficulty with speech, so he wrote the Sichas. I'll upon him for the bar mitzvah of his grandson. There's a lot of discussion there about the history of the Alter Rebbe's celebrating the bar mitzvah of the Mittel Rebbe. And in that Sicha, it talks about the mile of the Aliya LeTorah b'minhag of the Shabbos. Yeah, there's a mile of having the first Aliya. Shabbos mincha is a Raiva de Raivin is a very special time. Aval pshita she'en lidchis chas v'sholem Aliya LeTorah Ad Shabbos habo la'achar Barmitzva. The Rebbe says chas v'sholem to delay the Aliya LeTorah till the following Shabbos, and he says he should have the Aliya on Rosh Hashanah. He says lav dafka has to be maftir. Okay, so here the Rebbe is telling him that he, despite the minhag Chabad not to have the first Aliya on Shabbos morning and wait for Shabbos mincha, but here there's a Yomtov. He tells him to have the Aliya Rosh Hashanah. On this basis, I told the family also, for this boy who's turning bar mitzvah on Shviur Shal Pesach, he should have his Aliya on Friday, on Shviur Shal Pesach. Then he can have again on Shabbos afternoon. You can have another again. Okay, going to the next point. So here's someone from somebody actually in New York, and is really redoing the house. So he sent me some videos. He didn't send me a photo, so I can't show you photos. But he sent me how they managed to reduce the house to a shell. They moved all the plaster, everything. It's I didn't see the floorboards or not, but they removed everything, mamish, and they're going to redo it. And so now, as we are accustomed in this part of the world, the houses have got these chimney breasts, or chimney-stacks, and they take a fair amount of space. And there's a question of removing the chimney stack. And the builder, who happens to be also from me, said, ask a shaila about what has to be done here. So we've gone through this several months ago, a similar shaila, but we have here the Tzavuos of Yehuda HaChassid. So you can see here the top quote: Lo yitetz odom tano v'chirayim she'oifim boy. One should not demolish an oven, stove, which is used for baking. If you want to use that space for something else, you should not remove a baking oven in order to use the space for something else. You should repair. If it's in disrepair, get it repaired, but don't remove it to use a space. It says it's a great sakon. Now, the case which we discussed a few months ago was a case that someone had bought a warehouse, and the previous owner, Yid from Williamsburg, he's made his own matzah oven. He had made it somewhere in the corner of the warehouse. He had built a matzah oven which they would use a week before Pesach, and now there was a question of removing that. That was a baking oven. Here, what we're talking about, the fireplaces, they're not baking ovens. They are just for heating the rooms. Now, here we have a letter of the Rebbe Rashab talking about, actually, there's 3 letters in this sequence. About demolishing an oven. Certainly, you're talking about, the question is about an oven used for baking. The oven which you have in the winter for warming up the house in winter, they may have some rooms had a fireplace, some didn't. So the room which is more brick and more solid walls, and that's where they had their fireplace. So then it's not included because it says clearly about a baking oven, not a fireplace. And no need to add to it. So on this basis, I told them there's not a problem of removing the chimney stacks. What we do remain with is the problem of when you demolish, when you want to block up a window, want to block up a door. And so when also, according to, I think it's we make a point of leaving a pipe, a connector between the 2 rooms where there was a passage for the ruchos through the window, and now to leave a little bit of a passage that they shouldn't have an issue with you. And so the same thing here between one floor and the other. The flue was connecting one floor and the other, and so one should leave a pipe in the space where there was the flue, to leave a pipe, and then later you can cover it over. So that's not such a big deal. But the basic removal of the chimney stack, that would be okay. Let's move on. Okay, I want to go on to about the Rebbe's kapitel and about shiur l'maylos. So, as it was already on the list of points for today, someone asked me if I could address the idea of bichlal of saying the Rebbe's kapitel after Gimel Tammuz. Well, does one celebrate a Rebbe's birthday or a birthday after the person has passed away? That's the question, I understood. Now, this question the Rebbe addressed, this is in chelik base of the Likutei Sichos. In the Hishofis of the Likutei Sichos chelik base, there's a whole string of sichos in relation to the Yud Shvat. A lot of them are the things which were said at the Shiva of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and so this is also part of that sequence. The Rebbe says this is also the answer for those who asked the question whether after Yud Shvat should one be saying Kapitel Ein Aleph. The Frierdiker Rebbe was 70 when he passed away. Should one continue saying the Kapitel of the Rebbe, which was then Kapitel Ein Aleph? Until when should I say it? Is the tshuva of them amidav zogen bis Yud Beis Tammuz? To continue saying the Kapitel Ein Aleph, even though he passed away in Yud Shvat, to continue saying his Kapitel. The Rebbe continues, he says, there are those who say it's a machlokes of the Rambam and Ravid, whether there is a concept of aging, after a person passed away. There are 2 proofs that after histalkus, after passing, there's still the concept of aging. One proof to this is it's a minhag Yisrael to observe a yortzeit every year. Yortzeit means the neshama is going higher. Is a proof that the neshama is also aging. Every year it's going progressing. So that's one proof. Nocharaya is top of the second column. Second proof, there is a reshime of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe wrote a diary of some sort where he writes about he had a chizoyon laila, he had a vision. His father, the Rebbe Rashab, came to him, and his father, the Rebbe Rashab, you'll see in a moment, he said a drush on the chapter Pei Daled, chapter 84 of Tehillim. This reshima is from Chov Chesron Tov Shin Hei. The Rebbe is already in America, and it's 24 years after his father had passed away. Was demolt is geworden 84 Jahre miyomelets von dem Rebbe Nishmosei. The Rebbe Rashab passed away. He was about 60 when he passed away. And this is 24 years later. He's now going into Kapitel. He was born Toprich Chaf Aleph. So he's now going into Kapitel Pei Dalet. Was demel endiksach the shayches. So he's going into Kapitel Mei Pei Hey. So he said a mimer in the dream of the Frierdiker Rebbe. In his vision, his father said a mimer on Kapitel Pei Dalet, which he had finished using that Kapitel, going on to Kapitel Pei Hey. So we have here, in this sikha at least, the Rebbe is saying very clearly the idea that there is the idea of saying a kapitel of the Rebbe after he passed away, and so hence we're going to look at another iyun. Just bear with me a moment, and I'll bring it up. Sorry. I spoke last night by the Kinus Torah here in Stamford Hill, and I'd like to share with you briefly, at least, the point which I shared there. There we are. All right, we're ready to share it. Share screen. Here we are. Okay, good. Can you see it? Just show of hands or any acknowledgement? Yeah. Good, thank you. Okay, so just give it a couple of minutes. The first slide here is from the Chidah. This is the Chidah wrote some 60, 80 Sforim. This is his commentary on Tehillim. And he writes the following. Tesvov Shir HaMailos, Omar David HaMelech Olav Sholem. David HaMelech says 15 Psalms which start off with the word Shir HaMailos. Keneged Tesvov Shonim Shechoyu HaOvos B'yachad. This is corresponding to the 15 years which the three Ovos lived together, because Yaakov was born when Yitzchok was 60 years old. Yitzchok was born when Avraham was 100 years old, and Avraham passed away at 175. So Yaakov was 15 years old when Avraham Avinu passed away. So you got the number 15. One cheshbon. And the Rebbe in the Sikha, the famous Sikha, he points out also that the Alter Rebbe was 15 years old, Tovkov Chof, when the Baal Shem Tov passed away. So we have a similar situation of the overlap of the first three generations for 15 years. Right. Ukeneged Tesvov Tevis, also corresponding to the 15 words Sheba Posuk. Vayifga ba'mokim vayikach me'avne hamokim. He's shortened the Posuk. Yaakov Avinu on his way to Choron, when he's running away from Esau, and so he comes to the Rashi says it was the Mokim HaBeis HaMikdash, and he davens there, and then he puts the stones around his head, and then he wakes up in the morning, and all the stones have become one, and then he makes it into a matzeva, a form of mizbeach, and he pours oil on it. Shema ha'even ha'hu nahahi nas shisin v'hi even hashasir. This stone, which Yaakov Avinu put together, or was put together as a result of what he did, this is the basis of the shisin. This is the pipeline underneath the mizbeach, where the water would, when the sukkahs would go down. V'hi even hashasir. And looking at this vort of the Chidah, I found it very puzzling, because the shisin is under the mizbeach, the even hashasiyah is in the kodesh hakadoshim, which are close to one another, but there's a distance of about 70 odd amos between them. And so what's this? And what does it mean? This stone is the shisin, and the shisin are from this stone, and the even hashasiyah. And the Evans are very puzzled by this. Also, so we're going to see something a little. Here's a piece from the Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi, just to help you remember where it is, it's in Sanhedrin, Perek Yud, where it talks about Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelik ve'Elohim Habo ve'Ela She'en Lahem Chelik, and one of those infamous people is Achitophel. So now the Yerushalmi tells a story. There's a similar story in Gemara Sukkah towards the end of in the fifth parak, but the details are a bit different. So in B'Shosha, where you find that when David came to dig Timal Yusim, means the foundation of the Beis Hamikdash, he dug 1,500 amas deep, and he did not get to the Tehoim, to the solid bed. He digs 1,500 amas deep, and he finds a basket, which means something which is a man-made article, which was very, very surprising. He wanted to lift this basket. So the basket says, "Let's ask Yochanan, no, don't. Why not? Why you say I can't pick you up?" So the basket says to David, because I am like the plug for the waters of the underground. If you live it is going to start causing flooding. All right, nice to know you. How long have you been sitting here? So the stone answers, the basket, says, Mishaita de Ashma Rachmona Koleba Besinai. And Hashem proclaimed at Har Sinai, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Ro'odos Aro, there was a trembling of the earth, Ushkias, and things sunk down. I think that's what it means. And I'm sitting here plugging the hole that the waters from the depth shouldn't rise. That's the end of the conversation. And David is not fazed by the caution aired by this basket. He didn't listen. He lifted the basket. Solik Tahima. So now the waters are flooding. And it was proposed to drown the world. Achitophel is an advisor of David, shrewd fella. He's seeing what's going on. He says, "Great. David will get drowned. He'll get choked by the water. But no molich. I'll take it. I'll take over." Omar David says, whoever knows how to stop this water and doesn't stop it, I'm giving a curse that he will be choked. So Achitophel uses what he uses. He says what he says, and he managed to stop the water. Here's David oimer shiro, shir ha-ma'alois, shir lemeya oilos. So it takes here, the first one is shir ha-ma'alois, and then we've got shir la-ma'alois. The second one is shir la-ma'alois. And la-ma'alois, Rashi on the spot in Kapitel Kuf Chaf Aleph in Tehillim says lemeya oilos. La-ma'alois is a remes for the going up 100 amas. So the Gemara in Sukkah in Bavli is a bit clearer that the water sunk down very, very low. It was far too low. The water table went far too low. And so there was a need to bring up the water table. And this is where David HaMelech says a shir amalis to bring it up. And for each of the 50 shir amalis, he brought it up 1,500, another 100 amas, and it brought it back. So that's why the second capital of the 50 shir amalis is shir la amalis. So someone asked me, why is that not the first capital? So I was stumped by this, but I thought afterwards a svara. The first one is shir ha'ma'alis el Hashem batzorosali. David HaMelech is saying, I'm in trouble. Hashem, help me, I'm in trouble. Water's flooding, what am I going to do? He said that niggin, that shear, and he saw the water. This is after the flooding. This is on its way up. But he needs to solve the problem. So he said shear ha'ma'alis. He saw it came up with the first shear it came up 100 amas. Okay, shear la ma'alis, lemeya oilos. And then he said another one, and that continued another 100 amas, etc. So this is the Yerushalmi. Then we have here about the Evan Shasiyah. So we have the Evan Shasiyah. This is the Mishnah in Ioma. Says in the first Beis Hamikdash, once the Oren had been put into hiding, to about 30 odd years before the Churban. So then there was a rock there, and it was there from Moshe V'yimar Rishonim, and there's this rock, and it's called Evan Shasiyah, and the Kohen Gadol it was three etzbois above the floor, and the Kohen would put the Ketores there. I think I'm running out of time a little bit. What we're seeing, the next quote is from Pirkei Rebbe Elazar, and he talks about Yaakov Avinu. He took this stone, which had been for first 12 stones, and then it became one stone. He made it into Mizbeach. After he made the Mizbeach, Hashem took this stone and threw it down all the way down to the depth. So this can, and that's the Evan Shasiyah. And so what we're seeing here possibly is the meaning of what we had before. The Evan Shasiyah is there from the beginning of creation, but then there's a certain insecurity of creation. When Yaakov Avinu comes onto the picture, so then there's a added security, added stability. So the Eibusha takes this stone, which corresponds to the 12 Shvatim, and adds it, connects it to the Evan Shasiyah. Because it's man-made, that's why it's called the Otzit, etc., because it was put together by Yaakov Avinu, collected the 12 stones. Possibly that's the pshat. And then it comes the time of Matan Torah, which we saw in the previous quote, the Yerushalmi saying, for sure, the stability of Yidden accepting the Torah. So again, that gives the Evan Shasiyah greater strength. We see the same idea comes up in the Zohar. This is in Zohar in Sefer Bereshis. And here it mentions about the Evan Shasiyah, and you can see the second red lettering. It talks about water also. So now the Evan Shasiyah is in the Kodesh Kedoshim. The water is by the Shisin, but now the Zohar connects the two. So we got these two things in the Beis Hamikdash: the rock, which is in the Kodesh Kedoshim, and the Shisin, which is under the Mizbeach, and they are connected. So I'm just trying to substantiate this kind of merger, which the Chidah did, of connecting the Shasiyah and the Evan Shisin, and the Evan Shasiyah and the Shisin. Here, this is from Ibn Chayriki, the Mishnah Chassidim. He says a pshat. It could be that the rock was lower down, and then it was lifted somehow, and it became visible. But it was there the whole time, and that's what the Mishnah says. So we'll finish off with this. This is from Sicha of Chof Cheshvan Tov Shin Mem Aleph, and the Rebbe also he's talking about the first word of Chumash and the last word of Chumash. First word is Bereshis, and the last word is Yisrael. And he says the word Bereshis, we know also, is one of the Pirushim is Boroshis. So the Eibishter created the Shisin. That's mentioned in the Gemara Sukkah. And the Rebbe addresses, and he says, you got the Shisin, second line, similar to the Evan Shasiyah. And the Evan Shasiyah has got to do with the Kodesh Kedoshim. And the Gemara says the Shisin are under the Mizbeach. So he answers that there is a cholol, there is a tunnel. From under the Mizbeach, that tunnel stretched until the Mokim Kodesh HaKadoshim. So there is an underground kind of duct, which is connecting between the Evan Shasiyah area and the Shisin, which explains what the Chidah was saying. Now, come back quickly to the Chidah, why he quoted the Pasuk by Yifga B'Mokim. What's that Pasuk got to do with? Because that was when Yaakov Avinu took those stones together. That's when he when that addition to the Evan Shasiyah was put together. So the Evan Shasiyah is very crucial to his pshat over here. At the same time, the whole story of the Shisin is also very much geared to this. The idea of the 100 amas or 15,000 amas, whatever, has got to do with the Shisin, as discussed in the Gemara Sukkah. And to finish off, the Rebbe says, what is the message of all of this fascinating stuff, is that when it is b'tchilas ha'avodah, and he looks at the whole world, b'yeinei basar, shemayim v'oretz v'chol tzivon, he sees Bereshis. Oimrim loi al tikre Bereshis ela boroshis. You see a Bereshis, boroshis. The Eibusha created the world for the shis, which means for David, Metzias ha'olam is not Metziusei matzmusei. It didn't. Ela boroshis, the Eibusha created it, and there's a Borei Olam created the world, and from the shisin, which is the Yesod Olam, and what it means also is Avodas Adam. Just to finish off Mamish, why did David HaMelech uproot that stone, or the basket, whatever it was? He was the plug. Why he? So the one possible pshat is he's setting the foundations for the Beis Hamikdash, and the Beis Hamikdash is a mokim kapara, is a mokim of atonement for anyone who sins can find atonement there. There may be a view that Mela, some sins are atonable within the system, but there are some sins which are such terrible sins that they are beyond repair. So David HaMelech is told by this stove, by this otzitz, if you lift this stone, it's irreparable. There's going to be a flood. The world is going to flood, and David HaMelech wants to demonstrate. No, I'm going to lift the stone, and even so, we'll find a way. The Eibishter will find a way of actually being able to do tshuva, even such a deeply reaching violation. Even that will also find a kapara. Someone is putting here on the chat that possibly the word eben shasiyah may be the basis of the English word chassis, which is the basis, the foundation of a car. Thank you. And okay, so Zomazoicha Zayin to see the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, and we'll be able to see the Rebbe actually in Tov Shinun Beis. There's a whole debate whether the Dome of the Rock, whether that rock is the Eben Shasiyah, a bit of a problem. It's bigger than the dimensions of the Kodesh Kodashim. Kodesh Kodashim was 20 by 20 amas. The rock in the mosque is bigger than 20. It's longer than 20 amas. So there's a whole debate whether it is or it isn't the Eben Shasiyah. But in Tov Shinun Beis, the Rebbe talks about the Eben Shasiyah, and he says that it's nigla, it's visible, and so the Rebbe was taking the view that that rock is the Eben Shasiyah. How to solve their problems? Okay. If you want to read up more about this last discussion in Nesivim B'Zdei HaShlichus, the first volume, at the end, this whole topic is discussed in much more detail. Meanwhile, I wish you a good Yomtov. Don't forget your Erev Tavshilin, and we should be able to celebrate Mashiach Suda with Mashiach Tzidkenu. Kol Tov.